Hey everyone, it's Amelia, and we are going to be talking about structuring your book serial, the basics. So let's get into it. First thing we're going to talk about are chapter expectations, and chapter expectations are going to vary a lot depending on the genre that you write. But typically, each serial fiction episode or chapter is going to be between 1,000 and 2,500 words. Again, genre dependent. Fantasy is going to be usually a bit on the hefty side because there's a lot of world building. Romance tends to be 1,000 to 1,500 chapter or word chapters. I would really suggest not to go over 4,000 words because readers will become bored. And again, this is heavily genre dependent, but a lot of people who read serial fiction tend to be, you can think of these people as reading when they're going from home to work in the morning. They'll be on the subway, they open their phone, they have a limited amount of time to read, and sometimes they don't have that enough time to read 4,000 words. Sometimes it's just, wow, this is too much. I just want something shorter to read, something more digestible. Not saying they won't read 4,000 words, again, depends on genre, but I would suggest to stay under that word count. Something else you want in your chapters is a lot of action and drama over long descriptions. Long descriptions might be really good for fantasy, for the world building, but for serial fiction, we'll get into what the beats look like. But action and drama is what people are coming for, it's what they expect throughout that chapter. A lot of times, I actually have a author friend who is a primarily he writes books, novels, and he tried serials. And he was writing the serial and releasing it on Royal Road, and somebody commented and was like, basically, "I did this is really great, like, your book is really awesome, but it doesn't feel like it fits on this platform. It feels like you should be publishing books," because he had longer descriptions in his story. The descriptions were a lot heftier. They were diving into specific details that a serial fiction reader might not care about, but a book reader would. I know from experience from reading serials as well, especially romance, I don't care about literally any details at all. All I wanna know is what is happening with the main characters. All I wanna read is that action, that drama, that constant push and pull. I don't really care about what color shirt he had, what color the couch was, or how soft it was, unless you're talking about, "Oh, it's very luxurious, and he's like this billionaire." But small details are going to make your chapters a lot longer, and especially hefty details will make them extremely long, and you might hit that 4,000 word mark. Another thing with chapters, I personally wouldn't add more than one POV per chapter or episode, especially because these chapters are short. You don't want to ping pong back and forth between two or three characters. You want to get into the mind of one character, give them 1,000 words, 2,000 words, and then the next chapter, maybe it switches to the other person's point of view. So POV 1, you're getting information and you're being left off on a cliffhanger. And then the next episode, the next chapter, you're getting another person's point of view and they're giving you different information that they know. But POV 1 left off on a cliffhanger. So that cliffhanger might not be answered with the next episode, and that's completely fine. Again, like we talked about before, we are threading different characters, different POVs, different plot throughout this entire serial. So you can tie it up in the end if you want, or you can have it go on forever and ever. When you leave off on a cliffhanger, it doesn't have to be answered in the next episode, but we will get to story beats now to explain that a little bit more. So these are the traditional story beats in a novel. You have, again, traditional, not every story follows this, but this is how a lot of people learned how to write books. So you have that beginning introduction. Then you have rising action. Things are happening. You've uncovered a problem. More things are building up and up. These plots, these characters, the tension is running really high. Then you have a climax where maybe the problem is solved, maybe something huge happens to make the problem worse. Whatever it is, then you have that falling action where things are starting to get better. And then the end, which hopefully has a happily ever after if it's romance, or a resolution of some sorts. So this is going to be a little different. So again, this is the entire novel. Sometimes these are entire chapters as well. Chapters can follow this too. But when you're writing a serial, we're going to break down chapter beats. So you have that introduction, that beginning area. You have some rising action. So a problem is building up and up, and you almost get to the climax, and then the chapter stops completely. You do not get that falling action. You do not get a conclusion. You do not get that warm, fuzzy feeling when all the problems are solved, because the problems are not solved. They're going to continue into the next 10, 20, 40, 100,000 chapters. Whatever it may be, the problem is still there. What you're going to do in a serial is end right before the climax or on the climax, because this is going to really hook your readers in and keep them engaged. You do not want them to stop reading. You do not want them to feel like, oh, this is all great. This ended off on such like a great place. I am satisfied and I can go now. You do not want them to put their phone down. You don't want them to put their Kindle down, wherever they're reading this. You want them to stay there, read the next chapter, get that rising action again, get to the climax, and not feel satisfied. There are certain times where you do want them to feel satisfied, because going up on a cliffhanger every single chapter can get really annoying for the reader. You need to weave in there some, oh, this feels good throughout this serial. So people aren't constantly, oh my God, this builds up and up, and this person just constantly gets, nothing good happens to this person. And it could feel annoying. I know personally, I was watching this one TV show or one anime called He- My Shield Hero. And every single episode, something bad would happen to the main character. Nothing good happened ever. It was just like bad thing, worst thing, the worst thing. And it just kept building up and up to the point where I was like, this is great, but I'm not really enjoying this because I'm not getting anything in return. You're building up constantly for these serials or for these chapters. You're building up climax, building up climax, building up climax. You have all these threads. At some point, they need to be tied up so readers don't feel like you're dragging it out forever. Because some serials, you can feel like you're dragging it out forever. Some serials, if they're written really well, it doesn't feel like they're being dragged out forever. It feels like they're dragged out for a little bit, but to the reader, it doesn't feel like that. They're dragged out for a little bit, there's a resolution, but there's other problems that now the main characters are facing. For example, a couple ways you can leave off on cliffhangers, climax. For romance, maybe the main male character leans in for a kiss, but we don't see that kiss in this chapter. Fantasy, the enemy shoved his sword into my gut. The chapter ends. You don't know if the character lives, survives. Maybe it's something magical happens. You don't get to see that in this chapter. Mystery, you can end off on a clue, but don't explain what that clue is. So this is a time for your readers to figure it out themselves. You don't have to explain what this cliffhanger means. You don't have to explain what the clue is. Let the audience try to figure it out themselves. Don't tell them what it is. Maybe you can show a little bit, but sometimes having that clue, having that cliffhanger just there is enough to get their mind going and them thinking about it constantly until that next chapter is released. Story beats in a serial. You can basically think of your serial as a heartbeat. And so we have maybe a small cliffhanger. It builds up a very small problem, and then chapter ends and it drops back down. And then maybe there's this huge problem and chapter ends. It goes on for a little bit, and then you get that kind of line. So that the line, straight line, basically is going to indicate, hey, something is sewn up. And we're talking about threads. So something has come to a satisfying conclusion and the reader feels really good. And they're like, yeah, I love this story so much. I want to know what's going to happen next now. I don't need that cliffhanger because that ending or that way she or he tied that story up was so good. And so they are going to continue reading the story. You build them up again, you drop it off, build up, drop off. Constantly that up and down, drama, action, pulling them in, maybe not giving them the satisfaction of figuring out how that chapter or how that episode ends. Next, how to structure an ongoing story. This can be very difficult if you're used to the consistent publishing books at maybe 70K. You have a clear kind of cookie cutter way of seeing your characters and your problems unfold. And you know your problem should unfold by, I don't know, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, however, wherever it is in your specific story. You know that, and it's constant throughout, and your readers come back for that. But for serials, it's a little bit different. We've talked about threading, and I'm going to use that a lot. What you want to do is introduce your characters and problems throughout the story. You don't want to problem dump in one chapter and then have all these problems that you have to solve right away. What you want to do is drop your problem, let the characters deal with that problem for a little bit. Before they solve that problem, maybe another problem comes up. Maybe 3 more threads of conflict come up. And then that problem 1 is solved. And then you have 3 different avenues, 3 different ways you can go continue that story now. And you can choose whichever one it is. Maybe the other 2 problems go on the back burner, but they're still there. They're still lingering. This is going to make it really easy for you to make the story go on and on forever if you want it to. Again, serials don't have to go on forever, but if you want the story to continue, it's easy if you thread problems, if you thread characters who you might not even care about when you're creating them. Maybe they're a waiter, maybe they're a receptionist at the dentist that your character goes to see. Maybe they're just like this random guy on the street who picks up your wallet after you dropped it or your character's wallet after you dropped it. These people, if you give them a distinct feature or a distinct action that happens, you can loop back around to them very easily. We talked a little bit about before one problem gets resolved, another or 3 more pop up. Game of Thrones does this work very well. Before one character dies, you have 1, 2, 3 more characters that pop up that have problems, and you learn about those problems, those stories, and you care about those characters before character 1 dies. And then the constant injection of threads that you can weave out into your main stories. For example, maybe you're writing romance and you have one main character couple. So these 2 people are the main characters, but they have these really close friends. And in a traditional book series, maybe you have or main couple 1, they have book 1, main couple 2, they have book 2, and so on and so forth. But what you can do in a serial is main couple 1 is there for 40 chapters, but in chapter 30, main couple 2 starts to become more prevalent and you see them a lot heavier. Maybe you get some of their point of views and they go until chapter 80. And when chapter 70 hits, you have couple 3 come in, you weave them in and out of that story, and it can just go on and on. And you can consistently see POVs from couple 1, couple 2, couple 3, once you get to even couple 8. So that constant injection of threads that you can weave throughout your story is really important. for it to be able to easily go on. Next, how you're going to structure your serial. So what we have now, we have that rising action in the beginning, then we have that cliffhanger, that climax that we're ending off on. And then after that, authors usually leave something we call author notes or community engagement. And what this looks like is after that cliffhanger, you want your community to continue to talk, to continue to think about your story nonstop. And how you can do this is leave an author's note that says, "Hey, thanks for reading. What do you think is gonna happen next?" Get them talking in within the story. Get them interacting within the story so they feel a deeper connection with it. But these are left at the end of chapters, and you can post pretty much anything in them. So you can have a poll, you can ask them questions, you can maybe allude to something that's going to happen. I know whenever I leave off on a cliffhanger, I frame my questions, to get readers thinking one thing, even though I know something else is going to happen. So that plot twist, when it comes, even makes them, like, crazier because they're like, "I never saw this coming." And I was like, "Yeah, of course you didn't. I made sure of that." So that's something you can do as well, just considering author notes and community engagement. You don't have to do this. Not all serial fiction platforms will allow for it, but I think it's really cool, really interesting to see your community become part of the story. But that is all for this section. I will see you in the next one.